Hola chicos! Today we are going to begin some new grammar. We're going to talk about section 2.1, which your textbook calls familiar commands. However, I refer to these as two commands. The reason your textbook calls them familiar commands is because we use them to refer to people we are familiar with, or the people that we would use the to form of the verb with. That would be our friends and family, people younger than us, even our pets. If we're talking to them, we use the to form of the verb. So, there are two different types of to commands. We could have affirmative to commands or negative to commands. Today, we are just going to focus on the affirmative commands. If you're familiar with the present tense, these will be very, very easy for you to form. How do I form familiar to commands? Very, very easily. All you have to do is conjugate the verb to the él, ella, usted form in the present tense. That's it. To form a familiar affirmative to command, all you do is conjugate your verb into the él, ella, usted form of the present tense. Let's look at some examples, like guarda el documento antes de cerrarlo. Guarda comes from the verb guardar. It is the él, ella, usted form, and therefore it is also the affirmative to command. Imprime comes from imprimir. It is the él, ella, usted form of the verb, and therefore also its affirmative to command. I want you to take a minute and try out these ones. So, if we have hablar, first thing we do, put it into the él, ella, usted form. Same with guardar, and prender, and imprimir. So, we have the él, ella, usted form. What are the affirmative to commands for those four verbs? If you said habla, guarda, prende, and imprime, you're correct. There's a reason I skipped volver and pedir, and that is they're a little bit different. They're both stem-changing verbs. Volver is a O to UE verb. Pedir is E to I. So if we put volver into the él, ella, usted form, we would get vuelve, and pedir becomes pide. When we have a stem-changing verb, we have to include that stem change when we make it an affirmative to command. Makes sense, right? All we're doing is taking the él, ella, usted form. Therefore, if the él, ella, usted form has a stem change, our affirmative to command also has a stem change. So the command would be vuelve for volver and pide for pedir. I've got a couple more I want you to try on your own. These are all vocab words: arrancar, borrar, descargar, sonar. Please form the positive to command for each of these verbs. Now, let's go over the answers. Arrancar becomes arranca. Borrar becomes borda. Descargar becomes descarga. Sonar becomes suena. Did you remember that sonar is an O to UE stem change? Remember, stem-changing verbs keep their stem change when they are being used as commands. Now, just like anything in Spanish, there are irregular command forms. These verbs work a little bit differently. Instead of putting them into the él, ella, usted form, you are just going to use the irregular form I give you. It is extremely important that you memorize these command forms. There are 8 irregular affirmative to commands, and if you notice all of these verbs over here, they're our usual suspects. With the exception of salir, they're pretty much always irregular. In the present, in the preterite, they are irregular verbs, and they will, for the most part, always be irregular. So, what are the affirmative to commands? Tener goes to ten. Venir becomes ven. Poner becomes pon. Salir, sal. Decir, di. Ser, say, with an accent. Ir, ve. Hacer, haz. Repitan. Ten, ven, pon, sal, di, se, ve, haz. We're going to learn a couple different songs to help us remember the irregular affirmative to commands. Again, I highly recommend that you memorize them. There's no other way to remember them. One thing really quickly that I want to point out is that ir and ver have the same command form. Because of this, we have to use the context to help us determine meaning. Just like these examples give you. Ve al cibercafé con Yolanda. Go to the cybercafe with Yolanda. Ve ese programa es muy interesante. See that program. It is very interesting. Again, context will help us determine if we're using ir or ver for these command forms. This right here is a YouTube clip that I'm going to show you in class to help us remember the irregulars. So, what have we talked about today? How are familiar commands formed? How do we form affirmative to commands? Remember, all we do is take the el, ella, usted form of the present tense. Don't forget, there are still irregular verbs that we have to take into consideration. The irregular verbs are ten, ven, pon, sal, di, se, ve, haz. At this point, you should be able to conjugate and form affirmative to commands on your own. We are going to practice together in class tomorrow. Make sure you study those irregular verbs. Know their infinitive, know what their command form is. Adios!